A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. And Jesus told the crowds all these things in parables. Without a parable, he told them nothing. And this was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth to speak in parables. I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world. The word of the Lord. Now, Jesus gives 2 very important parables here that do a lot of heavy lifting describing the way God operates in our world and how God does not operate by human rules or the way we would expect God to be at work in this world. In order to give it context, it's important to remember the parable right before this one was the parable of the sower of the seeds. Where Jesus describes a sower who isn't picking and choosing where to plant the seeds based on where she or he thinks that they'll get the most payoff or will be worth their while, but rather just sows the seeds abundantly and freely and without worry of the outcome, and what will be, and it will grow where it needs to grow. And Jesus describes God's abundance, God's love at work, building the kingdom in that way. Not with reserve and saying, I'm just going to pick and choose where it's worth my while, where it's worth my time. But I'm going to sow abundantly and freely to everyone and everywhere and let grow what will grow. It's a message to us about how God's abundance and therefore our love, our abundance and generosity should not be restricted by where we think it's going to be worth our while, or where we think it's going to pay off, because we don't know. We don't know where those seeds will grow. And so we should be free with things like our love, our forgiveness, our sense of justice and kindness, who we feel free to extend ourselves to. And in that way, in that light, these 2 parables are very important because it's further talk about God being at work in our world. One being the mustard seed. That idea of if you were to judge it at first glance, you were to say this little seed can't be worth that much. But God doesn't work the way we work. God doesn't judge it, prejudge it. And instead, if we are to take that same idea and to say, let's plant that little seed of love, that little seed of forgiveness, that little seed of kindness, or offering someone the benefit of the doubt without judging or condemning, who knows what it could grow into, because sometimes we get surprised. And God shows that sometimes even that little mustard seed grows into the greatest of shrubs like a tree and may be the support of many birds. Possibly the next, maybe even more surprising parable is this idea of the woman leavening the 3 measures of bread. And if you know your gospel, you may know that when Jesus refers to leaven, Jesus pretty much always refers to leaven as being a corrupting and a bad thing. We don't want to lose that context because many of us are pretty used to putting yeast in our breads. But when Jesus describes leavening breads, he always means it in a subversive kind of corrupting way, the leaven of the Pharisees, the leaven of the Sadducees, and never means it in a good way. So it's surprising, especially when you understand the traditional understanding of 3 measures of bread being an appropriate offering to God. So why is this woman sneaking in something subversive that's changing and altering these 3 measures of bread? And how is that like the kingdom? Well, Jesus is being very real with his disciples here and saying, I'm offering you something subversive. You have this traditional understanding about what is good and the way the world works, and that the person who is the strongest has the right to what they have, and that if somebody has hurt you, you have the right to hurt them back equally, or that if you withhold your kindness from somebody, you're allowed to withhold your kindness from somebody because they weren't worthy of it. The ideas of shame and honor. And Jesus is saying, I'm coming to corrupt that idea, to change it up on you. I'm slipping a little bit of leaven into your 3 measures of bread. And you know what will happen? 3 measures is actually a lot of flour. By my math and the math of some biblical scholars, it would make upwards of enough bread to feed a whole village once you add that leavening to it. Jesus is offering a message of the kingdom being, I've come to challenge you to think more broadly about who you include, who you forgive, how you seek justice, and who you see as worthy of your love. It's broader than you think it will be. So I'm challenging your ideas. And if you follow me, it's going to lead to not just enough bread for you, it's going to lead to enough bread to feed the whole village. And that is quite countercultural in its time. So Jesus is, with all of these parables, the sowers of the seed, the mustard seed, adding leavening to the bread, challenging our understanding of the way the world works, challenging us to think in God's terms, to say, who are we including? Who are we loving? Who are we prejudging? What's worth our while? And to put our minds not toward how we would judge, but instead to put our minds toward how God is at work in surprising ways in our world. So let's look forward to more of these surprising lessons from Jesus in the weeks to come. Amen.